Hello everyone and welcome to another video on our own devices. I'm Jean Messier, and a little while back I did a video on British Commonwealth training rifles of the First and Second World Wars. Well, today I'm out at the range by gracious invitation of the owner of these rifles to have a look at how they actually handle and shoot. Now, I know that in that previous video I had a look at the 22 caliber adapter for the Boys anti-tank rifle. Unfortunately, that is a prohibited device, can't be taken out of my friend Dirk's basement, and so we won't be looking at it today. I'm very sorry about that. Blame Canada. I also won't be looking at the history and mechanics of the rifles themselves, as I already covered that in the previous video. So if you want to learn more about that, please check that out. Now, I will make one exception for this rifle because this was not featured in the previous video and is a new addition to my friend's collection. This is a rifle long .22-inch RF, and this is a 22 caliber training conversion of the magazine Lee Enfield or long Lee rifle. In 1888, the British Army replaced its single-shot Martini Henry rifles with a bolt-action repeating Lee Mk.IV rifle, which combined the bolt and magazine design of James Paris Lee with the rifling system of William Mk.IV. And this was a black powder rifle, and so the Mk.IV rifling was very shallow in order to reduce fouling caused by the black powder residue. Then in 1895, the British Army switched over to smokeless powder, which had recently been invented, in the form of the venerable .303 British cartridge. And the Mk.IV rifling was replaced with Enfield rifling, which is more appropriate to that powder to produce the Lee Enfield rifle. And the magazine Lee Enfield, or long Lee, remained the standard rifle of the British Army until 1903, when it and the various carbine versions started being replaced by the universal short rifle, what we know as the short magazine Lee Enfield, or SMLE. Now, interestingly enough, the first 22 caliber conversion of the long Lee was the rifle short .22-inch RF, which was actually long Lee cut down so that it simulated the handling of the then standard short magazine Lee Enfield. And this conversion work started in 1907. And it wasn't until 1912 that long Lees were converted to 22 caliber in their original form factor in order to train reserve units that were still equipped with the long rifles. And they converted both the Lee Enfields as well as the older Lee Mk.IV rifles. There were two different models. There was the Mark I and the Mark I Star. And the basic difference between them was that the Mark I Star still had this safety on the back of the bolt. This particular example has its safety, so this would be a Mark I Star. Now, the last rifle in this series was the 1914 pattern, which was converted from the later Charger Loading Lee Enfield, or CLLE. Now, even more interestingly, this appears to have been converted from the Mark I India pattern, as evidenced by the sliding charger bridge and the eye stamped on the stock socket. And Ian over at Forgotten Weapons has a whole video on that model if you're interested, link in the description. Now, the main modifications to this were to the barrel. Some of these were solid 22 caliber barrels that were made from scratch, whereas others were sleeved down from .303 caliber using the Parker Hale Company's proprietary Parker rifling system. Modifications were also made to the bolt face and the sight to accommodate the 22 caliber rimfire cartridge, and early versions had the magazine replaced with a Hiscock Parker magazine, which had a small spring-loaded compartment to hold 5 22 caliber cartridges. Unfortunately, those proved to be very unreliable, and they were soon replaced with just hollow magazines that acted as brass catchers, and you would actually have to single-load the rifle. This one just has a regular .303 magazine, and you would close the magazine cutoff here in order to single load. All right, so let's actually take this out on the range and see how it works. I have a couple of period targets, 18 centimeters tall and designed to be set up at 30 yards range. I will warn you, I am not the world's best shot, far from it actually, but this should give a pretty good indication of what it would have been like for your average World War I recruit during training. Yeah, that's inconvenient. The brass isn't caught by the magazine, and it doesn't actually eject, so you have to tip it out every time. All right, so the next rifle we have is the Ross Cadet 1912. This was invented by Sir Charles Ross, who also invented the full-bore Ross rifle adopted by the Canadian Army in 1912. He also ordered 10,000 of these in order to train Canadian troops. Now, just like the full-scale Ross rifle, this has a straight pull bolt action, but the action itself is very different. In fact, this shares no parts commonality with the full-bore Ross at all, so it's not really accurate to call this a 22 caliber version of the Ross, but rather a 22 caliber analog, I guess. And one of the really neat features of this rifle is this little button at the front of the trigger guard, which when you push it, pops up the bolt and ejects your cartridge. And that would be very handy during training if the range safety officer asks everybody to show clear. You just push the button, it ejects your one and only cartridge. This is single loading, and your rifle is safe. So let's see how this actually works on the range. All right, so again, straight pull bolt action, locked in place. And if you want to see the cartridge ejection, out she comes. Right. 5 rounds downrange. This has really nice peep sights. This is very nice to shoot. Moving on, we have the rifle number 2 Mk.IV. This was the first proper conversion of the short magazine Lee Enfield to be adopted. That is one that wasn't converted from a long Lee or a Lee Metford. So conversion work on these started in 1912, and initially they were given custom-made 22 caliber solid barrels. But when the First World War broke out, the British didn't want to interrupt production of proper 303 caliber barrels, so most of the rest were manufactured using Parker rifling sleeves. Now, just like the long Lee that we had a look at, the main modifications are to the barrel, the bolt face, the sights, and to the magazine, which in this case wasn't converted to hold 22 caliber cartridges, but simply had its follower and its spring removed so that it would act as a brass catcher. So let's take this out on the range and see how it handles. All right, so unlike other Lee Enfield conversions, this doesn't have any sort of loading ramp, so if you drop your cartridge, it's lost inside the magazine. Nice Ross peep sight here. Crank that all the way down. See, that's what happens. So now we move on into the Second World War period with a nice piece of Canadiana. This is a Cooey 82 Cadet rifle, and this is basically a classic Cooey 39 22 caliber single shot rifle in a full-length Cadet stock. And the Cooey action was unique in that when you actually cycled it, it didn't cock the firing pin. You actually had to do that on your own. And since these rifles were intended to be boys' rifles, not the anti-tank rifle, but a rifle for young boys, this was an added safety feature. And so there's really not much to talk about with this one, except to say that after the Second World War, a lot of these were converted to drill purpose by removing the bolt and screwing in a dummy magazine on the bottom. And this is because drill with Lee Enfield style rifles requires a lot of locating your hand relative to the magazine and also, in certain cases, slapping the magazine. So again, not much to this. Let's see how it actually shoots. Right, so I have to remember to cock back the firing pin every time. Let's see if I can. So finally, we come to the post-war era with the Rifle C number 7. This is a Canadian conversion of the Rifle number 4, which was the standard rifle for most of the British Commonwealth during the Second World War. However, this is not to be confused with the British Rifle number 7, which was used by the Royal Air Force. In fact, as I mentioned in my previous video, after the war, all the branches of the British Armed Forces chose a different conversion pattern of the Lee Enfield rifle for training. The RAF had the number 7, the Army had the number 8, and the Royal Navy had the number 9. And the British #7 actually had a functioning magazine for 22 caliber cartridges, whereas the Canadian version did not. Instead, we have a modified follower on the magazine that acts as a feeding ramp so you can single load cartridges. So otherwise, not much to this. Let's see how it actually shoots. All right, last but not least, this actually has a nice feed ramp. I'll just stick that on. Oh, apparently not. Okay, so that loading ramp doesn't actually work all that well. Good to know. Yeah, nope. Not going to use this ramp. Just going to load it straight in the chamber there. Right, so walking up to the targets, I think these results speak for themselves. The long Lee has regular tangent sights, but I didn't find it too difficult to get a good sight picture. And as you can see, all my shots landed on the paper, but not on the silhouette. My only major complaint with the long Lee is that it doesn't eject the spent cases properly, and without a hollow magazine, there is nowhere for them to collect, so you have to tip out the cases every time. By far my favorite of the bunch was the Ross Cadet. It's very light and handy and well balanced, and the aperture sights are excellent. And as you can see, I achieved a much tighter grouping. Loading and ejecting are also very smooth. There's actually a loading platform, so you can just drop the cartridges in and close the bolt without having to worry about precise placement. And panning over, you can see that with the last 3 rifles, I didn't hit anything at all. And I chalk this up mainly to the sights not being well adjusted. According to Dirk, the owner of these rifles, he hasn't shot them at all since purchasing them. So I'm sure the accuracy could be greatly improved with a little practice. On the #2 Mark IV in particular, the original SMLE rear sights interfered with the Ross aperture sights, making it very difficult for me to acquire the front sight blade. Also, since there's no loading ramp, you have to be careful when loading, otherwise rounds will fall out of the chamber into the empty magazine. On the Cooey 82, the rear aperture sight was loose, so I probably ended up shooting either very high or very low. I didn't have any problems remembering to pull back the cocking piece before each shot, but I imagine that might have been a little counterproductive for actual troops in training. It would probably take a little while to unlearn this step once they graduated to full-bore rifles. Finally, with the C #7, I also had problems acquiring the front sight blade through the rear aperture sight. Also, while the magazine features a loading ramp, it didn't work at all, and if I just dropped the rounds onto it and closed the bolt, the rounds would not feed properly and the bolt would jam, so I had to feed the rounds manually into the chamber, just like with the #2 Mark IV. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and a big huge shout out to my friend Dirk for allowing me to take these out to the range and try them out. This was really a lot of fun. Now, I'll see you on another video where we'll have a look at yet more weapons and other vintage devices just like these. Until then, I'm Jude Messier from Our Own Devices. Have a great day.